All right, welcome back. If you've been following me on this portrait drawing, we're on day 3, and I want to draw for about 30 minutes on this. Just take some time this morning and work on some of the areas that I saw last night that I wanted to correct today. So somebody mentioned to me that I'm sounding really tired, and that I'm not talking real clear or very loud and that kind of thing. I'm not tired. It's early in the morning and I have had coffee, but if you're an artist, you know what I'm talking about. It engages a different part of your brain. And so you are less able to articulate things when you're drawing. If I put the pencils down and I just started talking, I'd be fine. But I just wanted to make you aware of that in case you didn't know. So, all right. And I'm going to use some solvent here in a moment. Some of the things that I notice that need correcting, I won't correct. For a strictly technical rendering, I would correct, but for this demonstration and for the purpose of art, this just creating this portrait as an artistic piece, doesn't bother me that certain things may not be technically correct, because for me, that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing it for the enjoyment and to render something that is attractive and beautiful. That's my point with it. So it's not to have the most technically rendered portrait possible. If I were doing that, and if it were a commission, then I would have measured a whole lot more. And I would have, used a ruler, I would have used a divider, and I would have paid close attention to where everything was on my reference in alignment to everything on my art project itself, and made sure that everything technically was lined up correctly. I'm putting solvent on the background. This is pan pastel that I've used on the background. And I'll try not to get in the way of the camera. Sometimes I can't hardly help that. Now, what the solvent will do is it will push everything down into the grit of this sanded paper, which is nice. It doesn't destroy the grit, doesn't destroy that tooth, but because I'm going to go back over this background again, but what it will do is it will give me that underpainting tone that I want, and then I can go back over it with whatever else I want on top of it, which is really nice. And I don't want to use too much solvent, especially when I get closer to the portrait itself. Otherwise, I'll risk the solvent running into the portrait. I don't want to do that. It's not the end of the world if that happens. It can be corrected because I've done it before. But I don't like it when that happens. So I'm using a paper towel to wipe off some of the excess of the solvent. And I don't have to worry about brush strokes being so beautiful or anything like that. It doesn't matter. This is just to get coverage. That's it. And later on, I can worry about the way everything is looking. I just want to make sure that I'm covering it all right now. And this is working. And so the other thing I want to achieve is I want there to be more value or darker value towards the front of his face, and I want it to be lighter in value behind his head and over here on the left side. The reason for that is just composition wise. I want there to be I want the light is coming from this direction a little bit. There's more canopy light here than anything else, but there is a little bit of light coming in this direction. And the way to capitalize on that, a way to make that stand out and look even more convincing, or make it appear that there's light in that direction, is to make it darker on this side. Of course, this is a technique that has been used for hundreds of years to make it dark on the side that it's brighter. But the light is where the light is on the subject, and then fade it out on the other side, make it a little bit lighter in the background over there. So this isn't anything new, but I just wanted to explain that. Okay, I've got a lot of solvent up in here, which is fine. All right, almost done with this part. I'm going to be careful around that head. Make sure that I don't encroach in that area that I have colored pencil in. And again, if you're just now watching, I've got two other videos on where you're watching. If you're watching on YouTube, there's one other video, I think. Facebook, there's two other videos. The layout is on Facebook. And this is the third video on Facebook. And what I'm doing, this is the third day working on this. And so what my goal is to get this done today. Probably shouldn't have any problem getting it completed today. And once it's completed, then it will need to dry entirely. Which shouldn't take very long. A few minutes, it'll be dry before I frame it or anything. Okay, now I want to leave a little bit of room for the head, for that solvent to bleed if it's going to. Oh, thanks, Denise. Denise is saying that she's followed the podcast for years. Glad to see you in action. Awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here, Denise. All right. Let me look here. I want to move that sweatshirt up just a little bit. a little bit more than what it has been. So I'm using Pan Pastel again. And I think it's a black sweatshirt. But it might be navy. But there is a whole lot of other colors that I'm seeing in it. So I'm using some ultramarine blue. I think this is ultramarine. Yeah, it is. But I can do it, I can create this sweatshirt any color I want, right? And I think blue would be a nice complement to everything else. Of course, I always say that because I love blue. So it doesn't matter what I'm looking at, I'm always thinking blue would be nice to put in a drawing. Now, the problem with 800 grit, not necessarily a problem, but a limitation, I guess, or something to be aware of, is when you're using 800 grit sanded paper, there's not as much tooth as some of the other coarser grades, and so some of the pigment that you're putting on is going to have trouble staying put or sticking. Another reason why the solvent works really well, it just melts it into the grit or the tooth. Doesn't really melt it, does it? But you know what I mean. It pushes it down in there. Okay. Put a little bit of this over here on this side. There we go. That's enough, probably, for now. All right. Okay, so now I want to look back at some areas I can work on. Would be in the face now where I haven't put any solvent in there. So I'm in the final stages of the drawing, and so I can just kind of look around and see, what needs to be corrected, or what needs a little more attention, or I want to look for color shifts. I want things to look more uniform. I want there to be some continuity in the piece. That's one thing I look for, that I like, is for things to look a little more balanced than not balanced, I guess. When I see certain drawings, that's what I look at. I look to see how much balance there is. And by balance, I mean, is there good tonal value everywhere? And for me, right now, and I'll correct it later on, but for me, when I'm looking at this piece right now, the ear is standing out as being too much, a little bit too red, and a little bit too much of a focal point, which I don't want. I want it to be in the eyes. And so it's kind of tricky, because you don't want the eyes, one sure way to create a focal point or attention and draw the attention of the viewer is to create a lot of contrast in that area. But if I do that in the eye, where there isn't a lot of contrast in the reference, and I'm not a slave to the reference, but if I create too much contrast in the eye, then I run the risk of creating something that makes the subject look a lot older or makes everything look a little more out of balance. So the other option that I have then is I can mute down some of the redness in the ear, which is probably the direction that I'll go in. But I want to look at this overall skin tone just a little bit first before I do that. And the more that I add this olive brown and more of, you know, if you want to classify it, I would classify it as yellow. The more I add a yellow color, a yellow tone to the skin, which is a lot of what I'm doing right now, then the more that ear will stand out. And so the more out of balance, if you want to put it that way, that ear will become. And so I just want to be aware of that. And I want to make those corrections in here in a moment. So I'm floating back and forth between olive brown and brown ochre. I use that Naples. What is it? Naples ochre, I believe, in Luminance brand pencil. The Luminance line from Caran d'Ache. Okay. Just want to take a look at that. I can always get away with the neck being slightly darker, but because of the way this this light, the secondary light source just is reflecting back on the face, then this does have more light over here than, say, an area right up under here where the beard is casting a shadow. Okay, now I'm going to go back up in here, the ear. And one thing that you always want to do is just step back from your drawing and just take a look at it. Now I better sharpen this pencil. I don't have to sharpen the pencil as often with sanded paper when I'm using sanded paper as I do with, say, using Stonehenge or something like that. But there does reach a point where, especially in the final stages of a drawing, that you've got so much buildup that the only way to get it to stick is to have a pretty sharp point. And at this point, I'm kind of, you know, in certain areas, I'm pressing really hard and burnishing, starting to burnish in some areas. So I have to remember that I've got to keep a pretty sharp point. Let's see. I can add a little bit in there. The reference has a lot of contrast in the ear, and I don't really want to put in quite that much contrast. This is where, you know, and I don't hear a lot of artists talk about this, but this is a something that is huge to me, is the balance is so important. Balance is actually more important to me than being technically correct. And technically correct, I mean a strict representation of the reference. That's not as important as the balance of the values, creating something that is nice to look at. If you just want photo realism hardcore and you don't care about the artistic representation or the balance so that your eyes are able to look at something that is very alluring and pleasing, then, that's a different style of drawing. And that is very technical. And if you are into that, that is slightly different than what I'm typically into. Nothing wrong with it. It's just different. Okay, go down here. And then I got to blow this off because it starts to get a little bit of a buildup. We want to hit that in different directions so that I get all of it off of there. Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm okay with it right now. Sort of, yeah. I'm all right with it right now. After I do this one thing, and this one thing, and this one thing, it never stops. So sometimes I have to just tell myself, okay, stop, go on to something else. Okay. Now I do want to, let's see, I do want to include some of those shadows that I'm seeing there. This to me is the most enjoyable part, the last part of the drawing process, where you can add all these tiny things that lend themselves to realism. Other than that, if you stopped earlier, it could be, you could just say, okay, that's nice, but it could go in a storybook or something like that, which is fine. But you can also add some things that create more realism. Okay, and so that shadow under there, I want to get that rendered a little bit better. It's a slightly lighter in this area, right in here, and then that slightly lighter area comes over here towards the ear. And some people think this is silly. I think it adds a little something to the art piece. Sometimes you can't even put your finger on it. If you're viewing the piece, you can't say what it was that attracted you or held your attention. And sometimes it's just these little tiny things that are just, hard to describe. But when you see a piece that incorporates some of those elements. And for me, this is one of them. When you pay attention to soft shadows. And if you don't pay attention to soft shadows, then it starts looking stale. For me, for my experience looking at drawings, it looks stale. It looks predictable. It looks unintentional. Descriptions. I mean, it adds to realism when you're able to, and this is putting in shadows right in here that I can see in the reference. And when I think about light, how light, rules of light, how that works, the sticker in here, and that's what's peeking through. And so that's the main drive for me to go in certain directions with a piece is, does it add to the realism and does it add to the balance of the piece? For a different artist, it might be something entirely different. But for me, that's primarily what it is, especially in portraits. My end result, my goal is to make the end result for me, when I look, to be something that I can say, I've improved on the reference. I have something that I feel like is an improvement over the reference. And I want to capture some of these wrinkles, but I don't want to overemphasize them. But they are there, and so I want to make sure I'm including some of them. Adds to the character of the individual and of the portrait. There's also some age spots, which also is a nice addition to incorporate in the skin, because it adds to the character of the person and the realism as well. Okay, and I did try to incorporate some of those already. Some of them I want to accentuate just a little bit more. Some of them I want to de-emphasize. Some of them you may wish to not include because of composition. Again, I want it to look nice and not detract. Okay, that's not bad right there. Okay, I think I'm okay with what I've done right now, and now there seems to be an edge right here that I need to get rid of on the ear. There we go. Good enough for right now. Now I'll have to live with this and look back at it and see, what direction I want to go, because I'll work on it again later this afternoon, but I've got another drawing that I need to get started today as well. Okay. So, and I've got some other things I've got to get done today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the live stream. Thanks for watching.